Jerry Seinfeld was detested by him to the core. Why? We now know. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the unrivaled ruler of late-night television. His charisma, humor, and sincere admiration for gifted comedians made him famous. With a simple nod and an invitation on the sofa, Carson launched the careers of innumerable celebrities, including Joan Rivers and Robin Williams. Despite his enormous success, Carson never embraced Jerry Seinfeld as a comedian. During the prime of television, Carson's stamp of approval was crucial. An obscure comedian may become a household name with just one thumbs up from Johnny. But Carson, who was a member of the most influential family in show business, secretly despised the man who would become the highest-paid comedian on television. Even though millions of Americans looked forward to Seinfeld's Thursday night visits, the man responsible for creating late-night television couldn't tolerate him. The icy relationship between television's most influential kingmaker and the comedian who professed to produce a show about nothing is one of the most intriguing unspoken feuds in Hollywood, and we're going to put the spotlight on it today. Why did Carson suddenly flip against one of the most famous comedians in the world? Did it include business, personal matters, or something sinister? The response tells us a lot about the men involved and the reality of the entertainment industry behind the scenes. If you watch this film all the way to the end, you'll know why it means more than you think that the guy who launched the careers of so many comedians never gave Seinfeld his okay. If you want to know the horrifying truth about this Hollywood Cold War, you have to stay with me. Call me Jerry Seinfeld. Steinman, Jeannie. Greetings from Sam. Chosin Stein, who is 17 years old, and Seinfeld's connection. In 1993, Jerry Seinfeld had reached the pinnacle of his stardom. Thursday nights were all Seinfeld. At 38 years old, he possessed more influence in Hollywood than the majority of performers could ever hope to achieve, and critics praised him as a comic genius. Chosin Stein, a 17-year-old student at the famous Dalton School, was someone he met in Central Park at that time. A romance that caused eyebrows to raise across America developed out of an accidental meeting. The two were often photographed in intimate settings, despite Seinfeld's claims that they were only acquaintances until Shoshana turned 18. Even though they were 21 years apart in age, she couldn't legally drink as he was getting close to 40. The audience's unease was completely lost on Seinfeld. Johnny Carson found this to be completely unacceptable. Someone who worked on The Tonight Show in its last years claimed that Johnny was quite traditional about some things, and this really got under his skin. He had established himself professionally by playing the role of a reliable entertainer who stood for a specific social class. It was tacky, not inappropriate, for a middle-aged man to date a high school student, in his opinion. Reportedly, Carson, who was in his late 60s and nearing the end of his career, flat-out refused to bring up Seinfeld's relationship during his show. Carson subtly told his writers to cut out any future references to Seinfeld's private life after a monologue joke about the pair tanked with the crowd. According to an ex-NBC executive who was Carson's colleague, Johnny put up with a lot. One of them, however, was a 38-year-old who was seeing a 16-year-old. There were certain unspoken norms regarding the conduct of famous people in his day. All of them were shattered by dating someone as young as your daughter, particularly someone who was still a high school student. The disturbing nature of the relationship was noticed even by major outlets. The cover story of People magazine was headlined "The Graduate," a clear allusion to the 1967 film in which an elderly woman woos a young guy who has recently graduated from college. The sexy nature of the connection was pointed out by Newsweek, who questioned why someone as successful and mature as Seinfeld would pursue someone so young. After 4 years of dating, Seinfeld and Lowenstein broke up, but by then, he had already damaged his reputation in some quarters. In Johnny Carson's society, where propriety, class, and a certain code of conduct were still highly prized, Seinfeld had shown himself as anything but a gentleman. Carson casually mentioned Seinfeld in a rare interview after retiring and observed, "Some comedians understand that with great success comes great responsibility. Others just understand success." The implication was unmistakable. Watching Seinfeld on TV, you can't help but think, "Oh, well, he's a cab driver. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." However, you don't give a second thought to the haughtiness and insincerity that lurk beneath his iconic grin and catchphrase. Reportedly, the real Jerry Seinfeld was drastically different from the one that Americans enjoyed seeing on television every week. His millions of fans loved his observational comedy, but his co-workers said he was cold, distant, and even rude. In contrast, Carson was well known for his sincere gratitude toward those who had a hand in making his show a reality. Amidst his own enormous celebrity, Johnny would still take the time to learn the names of the stage hands, inquire about their families, and genuinely engage with those around him. Carson had a very level head despite having achieved the peak of television stardom. According to a producer who worked with Johnny subsequently on The Tonight Show and Seinfeld, Johnny always kept in mind that television was a medium that required collaboration. Hundreds of people's good performance was crucial to his success, and he knew it. Conversely, Jerry seemed to think that simply being present was a favor to everyone. After Seinfeld's appearance on The Tonight Show, the difference in style between the two men was obvious to everyone behind the scenes. While Seinfeld was punctual, well-prepared, and consistently professional, a member of the crew described him as having an invisible wall up between himself and the rest of the crew, and he was notoriously uncommunicative and unappreciative. It was noticed by Carson, not because he was overtly impolite, but because Carson admired Seinfeld's lack of warmth and humility. His conduct stood apart among the thousands of superstars he had hosted over his 30-year run. Johnny liked comedians who had layers, a former Tonight Show writer explained. During a comedy roundtable discussion, Jerry Seinfeld casually dismissed other comedians, including Carson favorites David Letterman and Jay Leno, for attempting too hard to connect with audiences. This became painfully apparent because Jerry valued authenticity, humility, and the ability to laugh at yourself in addition to sharp wit. Even though the crowd was laughing at Seinfeld's trademark snark, Carson's forced smile was noted by some in the green room. As one witness put it, the audience laughed, but the green room stayed silent. Everyone knew Johnny hated that kind of talk. Carson had built his empire on the notion that talent should speak for itself. Self-congratulation and the dismissal of peers were, in his view, signs of insecurity rather than confidence. For a man who had survived in the cutthroat world of television for 3 decades without making enemies, Seinfeld's approach to his colleagues felt unnecessarily sharp-edged. Johnny once told me that the mark of a truly great comedian August the 16th to the 18th and in Vienna, Virginia on August the 25th. Would you welcome and quickly Jerry Seinfeld? Is that other comedians want to be around them, recalled comedian Gary channeling years later with Jerry. That wasn't always the case. Carson valued modesty. Seinfeld flaunted wealth. Few topics highlighted the gulf between Carson and Seinfeld more starkly than their attitudes toward wealth and success. Despite amassing a fortune estimated at over $300 million during his broadcasting career, Johnny Carson lived relatively modestly by Hollywood standards. His giving was quiet, his lifestyle understated, and his public persona never revolved around his immense wealth. Johnny drove nice cars and had beautiful homes, remembered his longtime producer, Peter Lassali. But he never talked about them. He found that kind of thing distasteful. To him, flaunting wealth was the quickest way to lose touch with your audience. Seinfeld, by contrast, built much of his post-sitcom identity around his extraordinary wealth. His collection of over 100 Porsches became legendary. His private jet travel became routine. His $100 million yearly income from Seinfeld syndication was discussed openly in interviews. Rather than downplaying his riches, Seinfeld seemed to revel in them, building entire shows like Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee around his luxury automobile collection. This approach represented everything Carson disliked about modern celebrity culture. Having grown up during the Depression in Nebraska, Carson maintained a Midwestern sensibility about money throughout his life. Though he negotiated aggressively for his worth at NBC, becoming the highest-paid entertainer in television history, he considered public discussions of wealth to be in poor taste. Johnny once told one of the writers on our staff, "You don't get funnier when your garage gets bigger," revealed a former Tonight Show staff member. He believed comedy came from struggle, from observation, from living a normal life. When he heard about Jerry's car collection and his constant talk about his wealth, he just shook his head. For Carson's generation of entertainers, there was something almost unseemly about a comedian focusing so heavily on material possessions. The greats Carson admired, Jack Benny, George Burns, Bob Hope, all came from humble beginnings and maintained a certain everyman quality despite their success. To Carson, that connection with ordinary life was the wellspring of great comedy. Seinfeld's approach felt foreign to Carson, a symptom of a changing entertainment landscape where celebrities increasingly leveraged their wealth as part of their brand. While younger audiences might have found Seinfeld's luxurious lifestyle aspirational, to Carson it represented a disconnect from the very people who had made that success possible. The audience can smell it when you lose touch with real life. Carson once remarked to his longtime sidekick Ed McMahon, "And when that happens, you stop being funny. You're just rich." For a man who valued comedy above all else, there could be no greater criticism. Well, I'm here. We're all here. You're here. I think that's important because Seinfeld mocked Carson's talk show format. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson perfected the talk show format that would become the template for generations of hosts to follow. The monologue, the desk, the couch, the interviews. Carson turned these elements into an art form, creating a blueprint that Letterman, Leno, and countless others would adopt as their own. When Jerry Seinfeld launched his own interview series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, in 2012, he made a point of positioning it as a rejection of Carson's format, a modern alternative to what he characterized as an outdated approach to celebrity conversations. "I don't want to interview actors about movies I haven't seen," Seinfeld said in multiple promotional interviews. "I'm not interested in that fake enthusiasm, that pretend interest. That's why Comedians in Cars is the only show worth doing. It's real." While Seinfeld never mentioned Carson by name, the implication was clear to industry insiders. The traditional talk show Carson's innovation and legacy was obsolete, insincere, and unworthy of a real comedian's time. Johnny took that personally, revealed a close friend of Carson's who stayed in contact with him during his retirement years. Here was this guy who wouldn't have a career without the Tonight Show platform, basically dismissing Johnny's entire life's work as fake and phony. Of course, it bothered him. Carson, famously sensitive to slights and deeply protective of his legacy, was reportedly wounded by Seinfeld's dismissive attitude toward the format he had spent his life perfecting. For Carson, the talk show was not just entertainment. It was a nightly conversation with America, a format that had seen the country through assassinations, wars, scandals, and triumphs. Johnny believed the talk show was America's town square, explained a former NBC executive. He took the responsibility seriously when Jerry suggested it was all just superficial nonsense that cut deep for Johnny and for everyone who had devoted their lives to the format. What made the criticism particularly glaring was that Carson had provided Seinfeld with a crucial platform early in his career. Like so many comedians of his generation, Seinfeld's appearances on The Tonight Show had helped establish him with a national audience. To then turn around and dismiss that very format struck many of Carson's loyalists as ungrateful at best, disrespectful at worst. When asked about Seinfeld's comments during his retirement, Carson reportedly responded with characteristic understated wit. "I guess Jerry doesn't realize that without talk shows, he'd still be performing in pizza parlors in Long Island." The comment, delivered with Carson's trademark twinkle nonetheless, revealed the genuine hurt behind the humor. You could take the plug and shove it in the hole, which I don't even feel comfortable saying for some reason, but that would eliminate the donut. The hole and the plug. Seinfeld's lack of emotional depth. Throughout his 3 decades on air, Johnny Carson showcased comedians who represented the full spectrum of the human experience. He championed Richard Pryor, whose raw confessional comedy tackled race, addiction, and personal demons. He embraced George Carlin, whose social commentary challenged audiences to question authority and convention. He adored Robin Williams, whose manic energy barely concealed the pain and vulnerability beneath. What these Carson favorites shared was a willingness to reveal themselves, their flaws, their struggles, their humanity in service of their comedy. For Carson, the best humor wasn't just about observation. It was about connection. Seinfeld represented the polar opposite approach. His comedy, by his own proud admission, avoided politics, emotion, pain, and personal revelation. "I'm not interested in feelings," he once declared in an interview. "I'm interested in funny." This deliberate superficiality stood in stark contrast to everything Carson valued in a comedian. While he could appreciate Seinfeld's technical precision and undeniable skill, Carson found his work lacking the depth that separated mere comics from true artists. Johnny believed comedy should make you laugh, but great comedy should make you feel something else, too. Recognition, discomfort, relief, explained a longtime Carson confidant. He respected Jerry's craft, but he thought his comedy existed on the surface of life, never diving into the deeper waters where the real treasures are found. For Carson, who had weathered very public divorces, the death of his son, and his own battles with alcohol, comedy wasn't just about escaping life's difficulties. It was about transcending them, transforming them into something that could help others feel less alone. Seinfeld's approach, with its deliberate avoidance of emotional weight, struck Carson as a missed opportunity. "I'm not a comedian to teach you something or discuss cultural matters," Seinfeld once said. "It's not my job." To Carson, who believed that the greatest comedians did exactly that, this statement revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of comedy's potential power. When George Carlin died in 2008, Carson, then in the final months of his own life, reportedly remarked to a friend, "George never took the easy way. Even if you were laughing, he got you to think." In comedy, that's the difference between having fun and actually making an impact. Although Carson wasn't referring directly to Seinfeld, his close associates grasped the analogy he was making. Some comedians, in Carson's opinion, provide light on the human condition via their performances. Furthermore, Carson believed that technically gifted performer Jerry Seinfeld had taken the easy way out. A pit bull bites me. To put it simply, that would be my most prized possession. The link between Carson McDonald and that was it. A striking difference. Even before he passed away in 2005, Johnny Carson had a clear vision for his comedic successor, Norm Macdonald. Reportedly telling close associates that Norm Macdonald was the only comic that reminds me of myself, Carson made an exception for Norm, even though he rarely commented on comedians after retiring. Possibly the greatest compliment the late-night monarch could give. One of Carson's long-standing friends who stayed close to him in his last years was Johnny, and he sensed something unique in Norm. He reasoned that Norm was continuing a comic line that had begun with Jack Benny and continued along. Uncompromising, dry, and methodical, Johnny recognized the continuation of a lineage that was very important to him when he watched Norm. Unlike Carson's views towards Seinfeld, this bond between Macdonald and Carson is very strong. Norm personified Carson's revered courage and genuineness, in contrast to Jerry's polish and precision. Carson admired comedians who weren't scared to fail if it meant maintaining their individuality. A description that was spot on for Macdonald, yet appeared to contradict Seinfeld's methodical approach. Comedians of all ages paid respect to Macdonald after his private 9-year cancer fight ended in September 2021. David Letterman, Conan O'Brien, and Adam Sandler were among those who paid tribute. On the other hand, Jerry Seinfeld's noteworthy silence was noticeable. Although nobody anticipated Jerry to act as if they were friends when in fact they weren't, many took Jerry's total lack of acknowledgement, not even a token tweet or statement, as a purposeful rejection of a comedian whose approach to comedy exemplified everything Seinfeld stood for. A professional comedian who had guest spots on Seinfeld and The Tonight Show shared the opinion that Johnny would have been deeply affected by the quiet. Macdonald had made an appearance on Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee in 2017, which added to the startling silence. It would have confirmed everything he already believed about Jerry's character. In their chat, Norm had shown Carson the same refreshing candor and original perspective that had won Carson over all those years ago. But Seinfeld made no public statement about their friendship or Norm's impact on humor when Macdonald passed away. This omission gave credence to the criticism that Seinfeld lacked the selflessness and reverence for comedy's heritage that had made Carson famous, according to those who were faithful to Carson's legacy and principles. Although younger viewers may not have paid attention to Seinfeld's decision to ignore the comedy industry's veterans, it did lend credence to a storyline surrounding Jerry that had been developing for years. The way a comedian talks about other comedians is a good indicator of their character, Johnny remarked. Called Carson's previous producer to mind. When seen in that light, Jerry's quiet told it all. Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld's chasm is about more than simply their clashing personalities. It's about the titans of television itself. This represents a sea change in the American entertainment industry. Carson belonged to a generation that believed that popularity brought obligations to one's audience, one's craft, and one's supporters, as seen in the transition from the shared cultural experience era of broadcasting during Carson's time to the age of narrowcasting during Seinfeld. He had more than just a personal grudge against Seinfeld's style. Conceptually, it was deep. A new type of celebrity was embodied by Seinfeld, according to Carson. Exceptionally gifted technically, but emotionally cold. Highly accomplished, yet emotionally distant. Both men achieved remarkable success despite taking distinct ways, which is what makes their hidden rivalry so intriguing. Carson became America's most trusted guy after dominating late night for 30 years. Many believe Seinfeld's sitcom to be the best of all time, and he became rich at a rate that Carson could never have dreamed of during his prime. Despite his success, Seinfeld was never awarded Johnny Carson's blessing, the one thing that might have meant the most in the comic world. Carson saw Seinfeld as an alien to the most holy traditions of comedy, even if he, like countless lesser talents, received that career-making invitation to the couch following his stand-up appearances. Nearly perfect in every way, but lacking in vital detail. In a retirement interview, Carson reportedly said, "There are comedians who make you laugh until you cry. And then there are comedians who make you think. The great ones do both. I'm still waiting for Jerry to make me think." Viewers are left to wonder which approach has been more effective over the years. Carson's kind, welcoming manner that drew the whole country into a nightly chat, or Seinfeld's icy, dispassionate take on the inconsequential aspects of life. As time goes on, many of us long for Carson's America, where comedy could bring people together, but in this divided and isolated time, it seems like a relic from another period. For more information about the golden age of Hollywood, subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you like this in-depth look at one of the most intriguing unspoken feuds in the industry. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think about Carson Seinfeld and which comedian styles you like best. We would also love to hear your suggestions for future Hollywood feuds. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll be back next time with more tales from the days when television was a common cultural phenomenon.